Okay, it's recording. Well, it's the 25th of March. We have the third Dev Summit of the year. Yes, Prometheus IO is down, but it'll get fixed. Yeah, so let's get started. The first topic is by Julian and Björn, Go modules for Web TSDB PromQL etc. And I'll just hand over. So there we go. Hit it. Julian, Björn?
Yes, so basically we have a lot of people who would like us to go to Prometheus v2 for the Go modules so that they can easily do a go get on the Prometheus version, which we have always refused to do because we want to be able to break the API and it is against the Golang rules. And there are pros and cons in both directions. And we also had an experiment with modularize that we wanted to talk about, but it seems that this stopped working a few months ago and no one really complained. So I'm wondering, what people think about that subject, and should we enable people to actually be able to fetch the Prometheus with a v2 and just accept the fact that we don't follow the Golang conventions?
What would it take to follow the Golang conventions? Like what? Assuming we say, okay, using Prometheus stuff as a library is actually happening, and for certain things, this is what we actually tell people to do. Right? We tell people, if you want to read our blocks, use our TSDB library. If you want to parse PromQL, there is one library to do it. What would it take for us to embrace that and say, okay, these are libraries, maybe they're versioned separately from Prometheus, and we just end up with PromQL 35.0 used in Prometheus 2.28.
Yeah. So should I mean, I think we have the following options. First one, we could do the modularize thing if it works, right? I mean, we should definitely ask around if anyone has any idea how well this works. Perhaps Bartek has a bit of context. I think you introduced Duko, was that his name? I always think about Star Wars, but yeah. So if that works, could be a solution. The most, like the smallest possible change, I think, is to separate what Go modules put together, namely that Go modules uses the Prometheus versioning as a versioning of the API that the code provides, right? Which we never intended, and which, like so many projects, never intended, that are suddenly seen as libraries. So we could essentially, I think, just separate this. So we just continue with our normal release, but we use a different schema for the tags, and then we use the v something something tags for Go modules versioning, and this would just go up very often because we always have like breaking changes with every release. But we could just do like, this is Go module version 135. At least nobody can complain that we are not following Go module semantics. So it might be a bit weird.
How does Go modules support multiple libraries in one repository that have
so that's the third thing which we always kind of pushed back on, is a multi-Go module repository, which I just heard is pain in the neck, but perhaps it's not that bad, right? I never personally explored this. I just heard that it's kind of cumbersome, but this would be, from a very high-level perspective, not having done this, I think this would be the most reasonable solution. Especially we could focus this on certain directories that are often used as libraries. And the problem I see with Go modules, if you have many independent parts in one GitHub repo, you bomb the major version all the time, and then everyone who's using it thinks, oh my gosh, a breaking change, but the breaking change wasn't this rarely used little subdirectory. Well, what everyone is using has actually not changed, and now everyone has incompatible types because they all get new names. So that's, I think Go modules only really work if you have a Go module with a very limited scope in a way, right? this is already where like some of the library-like repos like client Golang suffer from that, because we have like the API client there as well as the instrumentation client. So, I mean, personally, I think if we have no other information, we should just explore a multi-module repository. But if one of us here in the group knows this is indeed, like, has hard evidence that this is indeed not practical, then we shouldn't.
So this is indeed not practical, because when you make a change somewhere, you need to change all the other dependencies in all the other Go modules in the same repository. What I was thinking about is that we can keep working as we are working now with a single monorepo, but like in the release branches, we have a Go mod in CMD Prometheus, and that's the only use case where we would have actually like a Go mod in the CMD Prometheus, so that in the main branch, the CI would still work. We would still have a Docker image for the main branch all the time up to date. But when the release shuffle, you would need to create a Go mod in the Prometheus CMD Prometheus directory, and we would tag that as a submodule, as a Git, as a sub-Go module.
Okay, like that sounds vaguely as if it could work, but I haven't completely understood it.
And the idea is that during the release, we create a go.mod in CMD Prometheus directory, and that one would be version 2.x, and that one like would match the user release. And we would do like regular releases of the libraries on the main branch, which would be independent from the CMD Go, which would actually be the actual Prometheus releases.
So does that avoid a multi-module repo?
Yes, that avoids a multi-module repo. It would only be multi-module in the release branches when you would have a module for the command line tools.
Okay, but then we have this problem that we have one version which would just essentially go up.
Yes, but when we break the API, we need then to update all the modules because they are client anyway between each other.
Do we? I'm not so sure, but yeah.
So the issue to solve is that how do we have a multi-module Git Go repository, but still inside it does not look like a multi-module? That's the main point. How can we avoid the interdependency and say, hey, for Prometheus, just use the current branch?
I think you can do that to a large extent with replace directives. Like you can basically tell it like, yeah, I want to use like the promql package, but really just go to /package/promql, use whatever is there, forget about versions, forget about tags. This is what you're building now.
No, because we still produce the go.sum, which are needed for reproducibility, and that go.sum still needs the current share of the repo.
Okay, but we could like have kind of a view on those libraries from branches that are submodules.
Yeah, we could have tooling to work around that, but it would put more weight on the contributor because they would need to run that tooling on each pull request, blah, blah, blah. And it would have conflicts every time we want to merge a pull request as well. But yeah, we can explore that. Just my experiments showed me that it was not as easy, but I am open to explore that.
I mean, I guess the question, the fundamental question we need to ask ourselves is, in the past, we just said like convenience of developing Prometheus itself trumps convenience for library users. But more recently, we've pushed more people towards being library users. So I think we should just reevaluate like how much of a compromise are we willing to make here? And I really can't say because I'm never working in Prometheus itself, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I would also note that the latest big API changes were made not by Prometheus developers, but by like projects like Cortex and Thanos because they wanted more convenient functions and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's the other way to just put certain things in their own repo, which you already did with TSDB and reverted it, but that was all before Go modules. But that kind of also demonstrated, I think, quite nicely the overhead you have if parts of your source tree are like separate. Maybe it be a Go module or just a separate repo that you have to import, vendor, whatever. Yeah. So what to do next? Should we wait for Duco's? What if he has news?
Yeah, I asked him, but I didn't hear anything, major, I don't know, users of this. So we would need to find a volunteer who will try to set that up.
I mean, he set this up and offered it, right, for people to use. And I've seen that for like 3 months or so, he didn't, or whoever maintains this, I think it's him, stopped updating this. So, I mean, it's safe to say it was not a blazing success and everyone is using it, but that might be a marketing issue, right?
Yeah. As a heavy user of Prometheus, yeah, I don't need that. And I am curious how many users are impacted by that. If for example, we have something synchronized that was kind of releasing well and no one actually used that, but maybe it was not visible. You're right. But I want to make sure we are not wasting effort on something that people don't actually need. I mean, I've seen this in a popular Go repo. They just removed Go modules and said we are reconsidering this when Go modules is mature. Like you could have this radical approach to just. I think this is similar to what Julian said, that we essentially just have a Go mod in the CMD for like building Prometheus, but we don't kind of expose the Prometheus repo as a Go module repo. It would just appear as a repo that has no Go modules. Perhaps that's also a possibility. We could do that, but then no one can, import Prometheus code. We essentially block it because from the next Go 1.17, all known modules or non-module packages are not gonna work.
Okay, I mean, this is not. I mean, if we see very popular Go repos who just decline to use Go modules, I don't think Go will just not stop work. I mean, I think this is not our battle to fight.
We have another solution, which is to publish Go modules on another kind of way. So currently you go get Prometheus. We could publish them on Prometheus.io, and you would do go get Prometheus.io/tsdb, and so the GitHub would be for our, and we would find a way to get the tags for the modules in another place.
I actually like that. So how does that work? Like when I do, like, I mean, Kubernetes does this already, right? When I include like Kates.io, what does that resolve to?
So you must have a meta tag in your HTML website, and then Go will cache that, and it will redirect to anywhere in the web where you have another repository. So we could have hidden repositories when we would actually do the tags we want, and still have the facing Prometheus.io in the Go path. It's like modularized, but hidden if you want.
And
but would that require a copy of the packages that have the right tags, or can Prometheus.io just overwrite everything?
We should check that.
Because I mean, if it can just overwrite everything, we could basically do all the library versioning on Prometheus.io, and then it's never our problem. Wait, I'm not sure. Okay.
We could also extract subdirectories and such into specific repositories, which are just being whatever push mechanism we have. I mean, it probably wouldn't even need to force push, just keep updating the thing. with the explicit understanding that it's only something to be consumed, but never to be edited directly.
But that was modularized.
Yeah, but this sounds
modularized.
This sounds like a more implicit modularize, essentially.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds great if it works. And then we can tell people, if you want to use this as a library, use this Prometheus.io import path. Okay, news from Duco.
I think we're at a little bit of a consensus point on where we want to go. The question is, do we have a volunteer, or do we just want to see if we have consensus that this is the thing which we actually want to pursue?
So
Yeah, I think more research is needed, but somebody also needs to own this. Otherwise, we'll just have this sitting around for another year and nothing happens.
Can this be driven by the people who have the most interest in these libraries?
And who know like Go modules really well.
Well, I know Go modules. I am interested in this. My question is, how open source is the modularized effort, and like, is that open source actually the modularized effort, and can we reuse that?
Yeah, it is everything, and I can essentially, Duco seems to be happy to, like, essentially he was maintaining this for a couple of time, and no one actually, maybe actually, appreciate that and so on. So maybe he's happy to essentially, kind of make sure to onboard us again, I guess, and just point to the things that you have to do as a maintainer, so we can kind of have another look, and maybe there's a way to transform to that in the idea you have, Julian, because it feels like less effort, but similar essential logic. Yeah.
I mean, if we gain consensus that we want to pursue this, then Duco has a promise that if the thing works and smells nicely, it can be used.
But
So
I think the modularized, there was a lot about thing that I thought will never fly, like implicitly automatically increase version tags and stuff like that. That all felt to me like, sure, he can try, but I mean, I'm not confident that this is going to work, and I don't want to give any promise to him that we will use this once he has set it up in a way that he thinks it works, right? And what the Prometheus IO, something that sounded more like some human will create a pointer into our commit history and say, this is now PromQL version 1 something, right? That's more like how it sounds to me, and that sounds way more manageable, and whoever wants this can like submit the change and say, I want to have a pointer to the next release of the PromQL module. But yeah, I can't promise if this is going to work, but this whole like automatically analyze the code and extract stuff and create a version number sounded a bit like, so if it works, great, but I don't believe it.
So jumping back to Matthias, go ahead.
What I think would really help make sure that this, whatever approach we choose, works is if we have someone on board, like Thanos, Cortex, ideally both on board, and say, we want to make this work for us, and we want this to be better for us than what we're currently doing. Like that's, for me, that's the yardstick, is basically, because that would also mean if we have Thanos and Cortex on board with using whichever mechanism we choose, or whichever mechanism this ends up being, then we also make sure that it's actually useful from the beginning, and we make sure that it stays useful. Because if it doesn't, right, then like the problem is, from the Prometheus side, there isn't so much we can actually say to Duco, because we're not the consumers of this. We're not really the ones whose commitment he needs. He needs the commitment.
Maybe to short circuit thing. My feeling is we have consensus that we want to try this, that we don't know how we want to try this, that we have a few people who are potentially interested in giving feedback and or doing design. So I suggest that we have call for consensus on wanting to explore this. opening a design doc and then inviting everyone who has an interest in just putting stuff in. I think that, for example, OpenTelemetry and such will also have an interest in trying their hands, and maybe they'll also assign some resources on this. So we have at least four different groups of people who might be interested. So for the intents and purposes of this call, I would just suggest we go for call for consensus. And see if we can, because I think we have consensus.
If you are speaking, Björn, you are muted, I think.
Yes, I was just going to say the same.
Sorry, I think we have consensus, but I think we should also have someone who owns this, because we have so many items now where we said we'll write a design doc, and there's an empty doc, if at all, or no doc at all, and yeah, everyone thinks we should do something about it, but we have no owner.
But which is fair, because I agree with Matthias that it's not inherently driven from within Prometheus, it's driven from without Prometheus. So I would expect that people who have an interest in this are driving this from the outside. So I think it's much more about Prometheus saying, yes, we are willing to accept this given sound design, and invite others to step up and do the work on designing and implementing this.
I think it would be helpful to have someone coordinate this who sits on the interface, right? If we have someone who is on Prometheus team, but also has an interest in using things as libraries.
Gautam is not here, so Bartek can volunteer, or we just wait until the next call and see if someone actually stepped up, and if not, then there's clearly not the interest we thought there would be, and we can just close it. Like, I don't think we are. It's not on us to make this completely happen. It's on us to open the possibility for others to chuck in and do part of the work if they care about it. If we close this thing in 2 months, of course, no one put anything in. That's also completely fine as an outcome.
It would be great to tell Thanos and Cortex, this is the person you should talk to.
Yeah, they can talk to me.
Okay.
I can speak out that I don't think we are interested, and maybe I'm wrong, and let Cortex people speak. But there is literally no improvement, and even worse, there is more burden on us, who are maintaining Prometheus library and improving, and kind of we would like to focus on what matters, and this is not what matters for us. Maybe because we are more close users, right? So I believe Otto might have more important kind of bet on this. So this is why I would like to not volunteer. I have more important things, but we can help. We can, find someone. I don't know.
Then let's do it that way. We nominate, like, Julian is the kind of person of contact for like people who use Prometheus as a library, to tell him if they are fine with the status quo, or if they want some way of doing this proper in a Go module style, and if yes, what's the idea? And then if the outcome is that, like, our most important users who use Prometheus as a library, they are fine, then we can close this and say they are fine. And if some people are not fine, we cannot make everyone happy, right?
Yeah, and then we can just do the V2 stuff and just tag and do whatever we want with the API.
So let's do consensus for everyone who joins us. You need to speak up more, because everyone here is equal. So you can just speak, except what is 1 bit. For call for consensus, it's basically between Prometheus team. But also as an invitation for everyone who is here in this call and not on Prometheus team, speak up. You're not the peanut gallery. You're actually invited to actively contribute to everything. Consensus. We want to explore this, but are not sure what the best approach is. Julian volunteers to shepherd a design document, and we expect users interested in the library use case will step up to do design and implementation work. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Very good. Next one, env support. So If you feel strongly, Frederick, we can also skip it. Again, I just put it in chronological order. I don't really truly care about this order. All of them ranked the same. So to onboard everyone who is not on team, we had a discussion about supporting env variables very carefully or super aggressively or anything in between. We did a straw poll internally, two-step, which came out at first. We tend to want to support this, and then we had a straw poll on how to support this, and that got only 5 responses. And the 2 most ranked ones were A, no substitution, only the external labels via env variable only, which basically means that we have carefully selected environment variables which you can put into your external labels and nothing else, like host and such. And the second ranked was substitution fields as the need arises, never for sensitive fields. Yeah, that's the background. One thing which I realized too late is a bit of a problem with the no substitution option. If there are clouds which have well-defined variable names, which would be relevant for external labels, it might be the case that we need to allow an in-between where we don't allow any major substitution or anything, but we still allow the user to select through a configuration which of those environment variables they want to put where. That's an in-between which we honestly didn't consider, in my opinion.
Do we have an actual use case for that?
Yes, just put the host name into external labels and don't have to deal with this through your config deployment.
No. I meant the well-defined cloud provider and variable.
So I stopped doing operational work before joining Grafana. So as far as I'm aware, AWS has a well-defined variable name, which is present in all the usual containers and such, which might be useful for this use case. I do not know if GCP and such have this. I would suspect they have, but someone else should who does more operational stuff on public clouds.
But what do you mean? We already support connecting to AWS using the SDK and the unvariables of AWS, all that stuff.
Okay, I've never run Prometheus within AWS.
So for AWS EC2, we also support the credential files of AWS, so we support the complete range for the service discovery.
So I think those are 2 different use cases, right? I think what Richie was talking about is I want my instance ID or my host name or whatever to be part of my external labels.
Yes.
I'm not sure why you would want that, but
HA pairs.
pair.
I have 2 identical configurations, and the only thing which is different between the 2 is the host name, and I want to put this as the external label, and everything else is just happening automatically. So I can deploy literally the same configuration on 2 or 10 different Prometheus instances, and everything which receives through remote read-write will simply know where this is coming from. Or
yes, but you can just send an environment variable pointing to another one, like $hostname.
Yeah. So you're going to have to start Prometheus in some way, and all those ways allow you to set an additional environment variable based on an already existing one. So I think this is not like if we say external labels through environment variables, I think that covers that case. Like you can, or at least it makes it very easy to do and to have the same configuration. You still have to have the configuration that says translate this thing into an external label, right? We don't have the automatic make the AWS host name an external label. But it would be very easy to make it do what you want.
yes.
I don't know if you're running on Kubernetes, for example. I mean, with the Prometheus operator, it just does that for you as well, right? And it takes the numbering in the stateful set. And which of your identities you want as an external label is then, yeah, so that's yeah.
Yes, but if someone's not using the operator or something, there should still be some way to do this, I think. And just gut feeling, I think we're actually migrating to this in between, which I mentioned was missing in the straw poll, where we allow people to basically say these and that environment variables can be put into this and that external label, but nothing else.
Well, I mean, my expectation with external labels from environment variables was that you don't need to tell Prometheus anything. You just set a variable with some well-known prefix, and then that becomes an additional external label.
Yeah, but
I mean, otherwise it's substitution. I mean, that's what I'm struggling with this in this discussion is that I think we're not talking about the same things, or we're talking about the same things under different names. So I would actually like to see a proposal for how the whole thing would actually work.
So my initial proposal was two things. First, that you can set any environment variable that would, with a prefix, become an external label in Prometheus. And the second thing was that we do not kill the service discoveries that want to use environment variable for configuration. For example, when you use console, there is the universal console API token, which is an environment variable every console user is using, but you cannot use that with Prometheus, no. And I want to revert that decision and say, okay, no, we allow console users to use the console API token because that's what everyone is using console.
Yes. So I absolutely agree with the second point, right? We shouldn't actively try to prevent magic variables for SDKs from working. Or rather, we should turn them on. If they're well-known things in that context, they should work. So that's a consensus that we can totally, that I would propose we make. Right? If we use an SDK that accepts environment variables, we support those. Because that's not even touching the Prometheus configuration. That's just not getting in the way. And it is possible for some of them. It's weird that it's not possible for others. And on the other hand, it relieves us from having to maintain every possible and every future way of configuring every possible SDK. Right? They do this for a reason. They do this because it's necessary. So that's something I totally agree with. And then yeah, for the other use, so but I think it's a separate thing to say, okay, external labels. Like, what's the concept there? What do we want?
The concept with external label is that you can use the same Prometheus configuration file in multiple systems and have different external labels. And the idea, because like when I look now at my alert managers, we have the alert manager config hash, and because all my alert managers don't need that kind of things, with just the hash, I can run conv value and know if my configuration is the same on my alert manager servers. And I cannot do that with Prometheus because of that external label. So the hash would be different on every Prometheus server. So I cannot check that my Prometheus servers are configured the same way.
I think what Matthias wanted to know is how is this supposed to work? Like he said, this magic well-known prefix, and this variable becomes an external label, right? With the suffix, and the variable value is the label value. Is that the idea?
Yes.
To me, that would be the most intuitive thing, honestly.
Yeah. And I think that's completely orthogonal to everything else. We could just allow that. I mean,
Exactly.
I have no problem with doing this. The problem is if we now say, if we do this, we do nothing else with environment variables. But I think we don't have to state that, right? I think we could just do this kind of creating external labels via a well-known prefix, suffix plus suffix will be the external label. Is it uppercase or lowercase? That needs to be decided. But I think that could be something that is uncontroversial and doesn't block any other of the options we have discussed.
No. And it doesn't directly support there is this other already well-known environment variable that comes in a specific environment. But I think that is too, I don't know if we actually need to support that. Because if you run your Prometheus on DigitalOcean and DigitalOcean provides such an environment variable, you're going to use user data to start Prometheus, and you can put in that user data exactly the line that Julian posted that says Prometheus external labels hostname equals DigitalOcean hostname or whatever. Right, and that's still static. It's still that you don't have to vary this node by node. You just need to transform one variable into another. I think that's an okay ask. If it turns out to be a huge problem, we can also still add more support for this. We can still, it would still be orthogonal to this proposal of just these environment variables that do just this one thing. So I would be on board with this. I like it.
The one question I have is if we should make an allowance for hostname, because this will most likely cover 80% of the use cases just by itself. And it seems weird to me that we force people to recast this instead of allowing at least that one super well-defined thing.
Well, what is weird is that now we don't allow anything like that. And like we have a solution that would fit 80% of the people or one that would fit 100% with like 30 seconds of work. So instead of adding a flag to Prometheus to allow that, then you would just like put the environment variable. I don't know. Because you will need to change something in Prometheus. We cannot from one release to another suddenly add the hostname is an external label. So the user needs to take an action. And I think that, yeah, it might make sense that people also want other external labels than just the hostname. I don't know. So yeah, I think that doing for the generic environment variable stuff would, I think, fix the issue. And I don't care putting like 10 extra seconds in our users to do that.
Could that be how you do it? Is that rather than a well-known environment variable, you just say there's a command line option which you list the environment variables that you want as external labels, and then you could add in the well-known hostname one if you want the well-known hostname one or not. But by default, it doesn't add anything, and then we don't have to know all the well-known ones as well.
Well, I mean, if we do that, we could just take I mean that kind of subvert. No, okay. I was just having the thought that we could just take external labels as a command line flag, but that just circumvents the configuration hash problem by just moving it into a configuration that's not part of the hash. So that never mind. But wait, I mean we're kind of doing that either way.
Because it's just one of the things is that all of these well-known environment variables, how well-known do they have to be for us to include them?
I'm wondering actually, for the host name specifically, if the host name is something that people want to have in their external labels, why do we take that from an environment variable at all? Why not from like os.hostname?
It won't always be the right value if it's just from os.hostname, possibly.
Right, but I mean, if that is not if the one that is not like if that is not what you want, you can always set your own environment variables and set your own external labels that way.
I feel as if we're overcomplicating the complete.
Yeah.
So my thought process is the following: we have we know that hostname will be the common case. So the only concern I would have with just getting started with hostname as the one thing which is allowed is that if we switch to or also allow a well-defined Prometheus underscore whatever, that there is a potential clash if we define both Prometheus underscore hostname and hostname, something like this. This is the only concern. But outside of this, wouldn't it be the 80-20 to just allow hostname for external label? Only that one thing, potentially behind a feature flag, so we can break it if we want to, and just let it run for 2 or 3 versions, see what users think and say, and then discuss it if needed. Because I think we are basically discussing stuff which might not be needed anyway.
Well, I don't see why no one would have the AWS region or the availability zone or anything like that in external label.
I personally actually like Stuart's suggestion of just moving external labels into flags. Like, to me, that makes perfect sense. Frankly, I don't see why we don't have that today.
Well, if you think about when you deploy Prometheus with systemd, it is way easier to add a new environment variable than a new flag, right? Okay, Ben disagrees, but
it depends-ish. It's
well,
rough.
yes, you can add an environment variable as a drop-in, and you can't, like, you have to reproduce the whole command line if you change it.
No, you can just put a command line flag into a variable and fudge it this way. So that is roughly equivalent, I would say. Overloading flags with configuration seems to violate the. Maybe that.
So can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
One of the biggest problems with using and promoting environment variables is environment variables can't be reloaded. So by having a lot of environment variables and trying to get more people to use environment variables, they're eventually going to come back and go, what the hell? Why won't my config update? I'm like, well, you put your configuration into an envar and you have to restart to get that.
Yeah, I mean, what you can also still do is you can put it where it is today in the configuration, and that does reload. That means we have to solve the conflict problem anyway, because you can already have an external label called hostname. We just need a clear order of preference. I think that's fine though.
We could have both, right? Like, we could have the ones passed via a flag that, well, by definition cannot be changed at runtime, and have the existing list as we have it today. We can break that anyways, right? Like, that's not something we can do. The flags would be additional.
In terms of order of precedence, there is a precedence for this, because a lot of other applications handle that in terms of, for example, having environment variables being above or below config files, above or below command option. So we shouldn't make that decision ourselves. We should just copy whoever, like Ansible or whatever, does it. So that one hopefully is an easy one.
I'm not even particular about the order in this case, because usually you're going to have non-intersecting sets. If you have overlapping sets, it's your own damn fault anyway, and you just can adapt to it.
No.
Well, I mean,
I'd say you probably have overlapping for external layers, because you want some which are in your config file are the same everywhere, and then you've got some of these more dynamic ones which come from envars, wouldn't you?
Right, but what I mean is you wouldn't, like, I don't see why you would set host name twice and then expect to override it with an envar.
I don't think that's a fair argument to make, because we need more and not less self-care functionality within Prometheus, which is also why I would be wary of offering more than one way to do this, which has mentally brought me back to substitution, because the advantage of substitution is I have one single place where what is actually being done. I do not need to start checking places. I don't need to check if in that system the unit file, maybe there's some Prometheus underscore something being set. I don't need to do this. I can just, I see this in one single place. What we can consider is that we only allow the substitution in the external label block. And I think that would actually cover all use cases which we have discussed, and also the security considerations.
That would cover what I was talking about in terms of how you decide which environment to use, because you just explicitly put it in the config, as you say.
Yes. No precedence, no conflict, no nothing. Enable the feature with a command line flag just to be on the safe side, and we are able to kill it if we ever need to, for whatever reason, or change it. So have it as experimental for 5 versions or such, and then do everything in configuration, but only in external label.
Well, the issue, Richie, if you do that, is that Prometheus will still be a Jackass project, which limits the user that say you can only do that on that field in the config file, and like for no good reason, we prevent users to do that in other places in the config file.
Do you have specific use cases, or can we just wait for users to actually complain?
The old, I want to pass my passwords from the environment, because environment is how my platform passes secrets. I know it's not ideal, but my preferred option, if we do substitution, is still, or I'm still against being peculiar of just imposing our notion of what is good and proper on our users. Just because you don't like secrets in environment variables, we use them all the time, and it's fine. And I would be mad if you specifically break my use case because you don't like it.
But you wouldn't be losing anything as opposed to what we have just discussed, and we can collect user feedback over 1 to 5 releases to see what the user base thinks.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we can start with substitution for just external labels and see how far that gets us. I just don't want us to go into that and that is the only one we will ever allow. Here is an arbitrary line in the sand that we will never cross. Because we're going to have to explain that. And I'd rather not explain that we just don't like the way you do your infrastructure. I'm actually mad about this point, because that's what that line in the sand says, is the way SoundCloud does its infrastructure is considered wrong and evil, and we should feel bad.
I don't think that is being said at all.
But why did you design Prometheus that way?
Well, so consider this. We designed Prometheus the way it is now because it was running. Yeah.
Is it relevant for the consensus? Because if not, I would like to time box this discussion, if possible. So consensus, we will allow substitution of end variables in the external label block only behind an experimental feature flag. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
External label block in the values, right?
Yeah, configuration block is what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay, I changed the wording, so I need to read it again. Consensus. We will allow substitution of end variables in the external label configuration block only behind an experimental feature flag. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
Abstain, but I won't get in the way of that. It's fine.
Do you want to be in the record as abstaining?
No, it's fine. This is good enough for a consensus.
I deliberately phrase it this way because it doesn't close anything, it only opens up.
Should we also take down the consensus on the other point that Julian brought up? That we let environment variables from provider SDKs through, and we don't actively suppress them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different consensus, right?
It's
Yes, it's a different consensus. It's a completely different it's a separate topic on environment variables.
Yeah,
it's just that apparently we are actively suppressing some of them.
Let's get this one first. I think what Julian meant is that we only want to allow the substitution in the value part of the external label. You couldn't control the label name of an external label with an environment variable.
Yeah.
Right? But this is how it sounds right now. You could just substitute anything in that block.
Yeah, I'm rewriting. I'll mark as non-green, and then we can have this again. But also, I think Matthias' point is a second discussion, because I didn't have the feeling we have consensus there. But so let's try again. I demarked the previous consensus just for the record. New attempt, consensus. We will allow substitution of end variables into label values in the external label configuration block, only behind an experimental feature flag. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Good. Should we have the discussion about SDKs as well? Because I think this would be a new discussion block.
Yeah, I think that it will be fast, quite fast, no? So in the last 4 weeks, I did ask AWS to test SIGV4, and they basically said, hey, you don't recognize my region directly, but I have set it in my configuration. And then we have a new cloud provider, Scaleway, and I asked them, oh yeah, we cannot use unvariables because it's not the way we do in Prometheus. And I think I want to remove that limitation and allow cloud providers to be configured their SDK the way that the user configure that elsewhere.
I think in the email discussion, Bartek was the only vocal objector, whatever.
And he left, of course, he had a conflict.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we actually need to, we cannot actually discuss this if he was the one who objected. Or we shouldn't. We can, but we shouldn't. Let's just put in there and try to have this discussion on the mailing list until the next one.
Yeah, but I think we always have people not at the Dev Summit, and they always have the right to say, okay, you consented on the Dev Summit, but it's not what I want. This is not the law what we have here, right? So I would say we could have this consensus, and then Bartek is free to say, okay, no, and then we can still say, okay, let's discuss it again at the Dev Summit, or let's have a vote, or whatever, right? I don't think we have to. We shouldn't even pretend that our consensi here at the Dev Summit are carved into stone, essentially. It's not an official vote.
Not carved into stone, but we have 9 people out of Prometheus team here. So, and historically, the consensus has been treated as rather strong.
Where is Bartek's point where he was against environment variables? Because I'm looking for his contribution, and the only one I find is +1 on env vars on everything. So.
He said it would require us to reflect on every single service discovery mechanism, how they're using environment variables. I don't think it's. I think we could convince him otherwise, because I think we even have this in when we just use the client code, and the client code reads the environment variable. I think we have this. We don't hack the client code to not allow this, right?
Yeah, indeed. So, well, in some ways, some cloud providers, we actually don't use the environment variable stuff and explicitly disallow that. But it is not.
Others we allow it.
You could argue even if we really consistently want to disallow it, we have more work than consistently allowing it.
Yes.
This argument could be made, I think.
Yes.
So I think we should, if we have the consensus here, we should express that consensus. But as for every consensus, be ready that a absent member might not consent.
I agree.
Again, this is not how we have treated consensus in this call historically, and I would be wary of just dumping this onto Bartek if he was the one who actually objected. I didn't look it up, and I forgot I brain dumped. But
okay, I then state now that a lot was dumped on me by a so-called consensus in a Dev Summit where I wasn't there, and specific people that are not here anymore treated this as a law, and I always objected that a consensus on the Dev Summit should be treated as like essentially a sledgehammer being kicking against my head. So I would actually not subscribe to this notion that a Dev Summit consensus is in any way a like strict rule to follow.
You just said that this is how it was treated historically.
There was a single person who used this as a sledgehammer, but that person is with us anymore. So I don't want to follow that tradition, and I don't want to state that this ever was a tradition.
All right, so I propose that we just check back with Bartek what exactly his concerns were, and like we discussed this on the mailing list, and then I think it's going to be okay. I don't actually think we have a strong disagreement here.
Yeah, that's why I would say let's put the consensus in there, so we know we had this consensus in the meeting as is, and as for every consensus, every team member who doesn't consent can express that. I don't think we have to speculate that an absent member might not consent.
Yeah, I think you are right, because then we cannot do any consensus if someone is not there.
All right. So how about this? We put down as a point now that we on this call have this consensus as a gesture of goodwill. We reach out to Bartek afterwards and say, hey, this is what we discussed, but you weren't there, and we want to make sure it's okay with you. And then if it's not, we can reopen the discussion, right? As Björn said.
We're just basically anticipating defeat of the consensus, and also I don't think this call is the right avenue to discuss any of those changes in historic behavior.
No. You started with historic behavior. You said we always did it that way, and this is what I objected against. We can just state nothing about history, then I'm also fine. Then nothing has been said, but
I don't think this is the right call to discuss any of this.
Okay,
Julian,
then let's not discuss it. I'm just saying let's put a consensus in the, if there's a consensus about this, let's put it into the meeting notes. You're free to say, because Bartek might not consent, you don't consent in his place. That's fine, but don't discuss the history and to argue what we consent or not consent now. Because you just said we should not discuss it here.
I stopped doing this. So anyway, yes, I do not feel comfortable speaking out in favor of consensus if we know that Bartek had concerns about it and had to drop from the call which he attended until just prior to this discussion.
Cool. Then let's take it up again on the mailing list and then come to a consensus next time.
Okay. Next point. Support compiling exporters into combined binaries, e.g. Grafana agent, IoT edge agent, data pipelines. Grafana agent is doing this, where for user convenience reasons, different exporters are put into the agent, which is within Prometheus proper, an absolute anti-pattern, and I myself wouldn't be using it as such. Yet there is significant user demand of treating this as a single binary, which has all the downsides of tying various versions of different things together. Yes, I fully agree. Yet it is something which we are seeing that people actually want and prefer on the end user side. The other thing is something which Ben and I discussed just recently, which is basically an IoT/edge agent of sorts, which is basically something which has MQTT and other things, and turns a massive amount of sensor data into Prometheus read-write as soon as possible, or Prometheus write as soon as possible, just pushing to a different storage backend. My own use case from back from 2015 mirrors this, where I would like to have a little bit of short caching period locally, in case one of the network pops goes down, or the links or pop network down, but I still collect data locally, and as soon as that thing rejoins my network, I get all my data back of what actually broke while that link was down, which is very ISP specific, but yet Edge and such is the same. And also there's the argument to be made for data pipelines, where it becomes easier to build single binaries of constructing data pipelines with the help of Prometheus exporters. Historically, we made this hard. Of course, it is against the pure wisdom of Prometheus. Yet there are valid use cases which don't actually hurt Prometheus. So it is a case of, should we simply stop blocking users from doing this if they want to do it, while making it explicitly clear that in the reference Prometheus use case, this should not be done.
So
could you explain how the two strategies that you just said solve the same problems? I feel like they are slightly different.
So I think that the simpler bit of this is some users want to implement the collectors, so node exporter collector, SNMP exporters collector, with their own main, and basically making it possible to import a package from each of the exporters that contains the collector functionality separate from the main. And sometimes this is as simple as a local person wants to implement their own some modifications to main that support, I don't know, Kerberos authentication or something silly, and they just want to have their own main. And making our standard pattern for exporters to package the collector separate from main is all we really want to do.
So I was not aware that we were actively trying to prevent this, and I've actually been working in the stats.d exporter to make it possible for people to use the bits and pieces of it, and people do. So I'm all in favor. Like I don't see why not.
Yeah, there was just some historical objection to this for no reason other than this isn't complex enough to warrant it.
No, what you just said, Ben, makes perfect sense to me. That, like, in some sense, that's just like, it's a vague statement, but good code organization, right?
Yeah.
So I see no reason not to organize code that way.
One point of order, please help me write the meeting notes.
I do have a question to anyone who has maybe the experience from the Grafana agent. How do the respective exporters like discover the thing to monitor? Does anybody know?
It's a big YAML, no?
Yeah, it's like you have the Prometheus and everything in the same thing, but for the specifics, I can look it up and send it into the list or make it part of the notes here. So for the intents and purpose of this recording, I'll put a link in here during or after this recording.
Sounds good. I'm genuinely curious, right? Like, is Prometheus Discovery involved here? Do you put the IPs of each individual thing?
Can we table this for outside of the Dev Summit so we can get to
That's
more
fine.
items?
Yep, I would agree, but I'll put something in. I think it's just service discovery, but I don't know for certain. Oh yeah, Julian is already doing it, perfect. And also, just to make this clear, we as Prometheus project should then just say, yes, we want to support this, to also signal to non-core exporters that, yes, this is something which we as Prometheus would like to enable, while not recommending it. So just this message is out in the open. Okay. Okay. So consensus. We want to make the collectors a separate package by default in our exporters. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Comments, changes? Very good. Okay. Next, Julian, move our containers into a districtless space.
Yes, so the idea is that we would move away from the custom BusyBox package that we built, and we try to build our exporters and Prometheus on a districtless base so that you only have the Golang binary in the container, and optionally the ulibc for containers that lead like glibc, but we would use districtless instead of BusyBox as the base for our containers. The reason for that is that there are security scanners which complain that the container is not secure, and it's kind of annoying, and also like it just reduces the exposition on security, potential security issues. And it's one less thing to maintain.
I used to be against this because I do like having a shell to be able to debug stuff. But Kubernetes now has debug containers, so I'm not a fan, but I wouldn't stand in the way. I like having a proper like base image. I also do see the pain.
Well, it is mainly the fact that the wget there cannot check SSL certificates, and a lot of users are complaining, so that's the trigger.
No. Well, but wait, but if they notice that the wget there can't check the certificates, then they're using the wget there, which means we
no, it's worse than that.
They have a security scanner that has found out that BusyBox version, blah 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 blah.
Okay, I see. Yeah, in that case, we can just like let's remove all that stuff and go districtless.
I think we already have a good consensus.
Question in general is, how breaking of a change is this to users?
So we would need to keep the UID the same for the data part. For the rest, we never advised anyone to use the BusyBox inside that package. And I don't know if maybe Ben, you know that, do we put prom tool into the binary, into the container?
Yeah, we put prom tool in the container.
But you can still call it without a shell. But maybe
Correct.
some people do.
Cool. I would only ask that we call this out like prominently in the release notes, because as someone who operates these systems, it's annoying when this comes as a surprise.
Yeah, as the last person to have touched the Docker file, I'm hesitant to do it without waiting for 2.0. But it would be fine to put it on the we're going to break our Docker file in 2.0 kind of change.
3.0.
I kind of would prefer that.
The other thing which we could consider is to, for release candidates and such, sometimes put this in, or maybe have a secondary binary which does this, and still offer the other, and at some point after 1 to 5 releases flip the default. So
yeah, I like that.
We could also simultaneously build both. We can make we can build and tag a BusyBox image if people want to use that.
And my point is, we keep the BusyBox one the default for today, and we make a release note and we try and make this public. And in half a year, we flip the default and see if anyone starts yelling.
I like that because it gives and especially if we say we already tag a dash distroless and a dash BusyBox, then people who specifically want one or the other, either the people who have problems with their security scanners can just start using the distroless right away. The people who need the BusyBox have a time window for changing to the specifically BusyBoxy image, and then we can give them a time frame that says, by then you need to have adopted your Docker, your YAMLs, whatever YAMLs you're using. So we just soften the blow there. I like that. There's always someone who relies on this. Specifically, there's going to be someone who relies on this because they're wrapping Prometheus, because that's what we tell everyone to do when they need to customize their configuration at startup. That may actually be a problem here, and that there are use cases that just are impossible unless we do full config and substitution.
Yeah, but this is also an advantage of having this for some time.
Yeah, and we're totally going to surface that.
But I would still prefer to do what Ben said and just switch when we do 3.x, which I expect to arrive at some point. So I think we don't have a big need to do that. And especially if you just start complaining hey, you do this, we can just point them, hey, yeah, but use the distroless, it does not have that big security issue.
But I don't want to lock users in with 3.x and just stop providing the other things. So I would be at least trying to see what users say and do this carefully with an RC, blah, blah, blah. And we will see if things break and they will start yelling immediately. And then we can actually gauge user feedback.
I don't think an RC would surface that. Not enough people use the RC.
Flipping, no. So, let me read out the consensus or the consensus proposition as written, because I think this is a summary in my opinion. Consensus, we want to support this. The plan is start building both images, keep BusyBox as the default, announce the change. In 2 to 3 releases, flip the default for an RC, gauge user feedback.
I think to get let's shorten, let's make it less definite, and just say we build both in parallel, and we announce that, and then we see, and then we can just come back and look at this in a few months when we've seen what happens.
Okay, fair.
So, we don't have to give a definite timeline right now. No. It's good to say this is where we want to go.
Agreed.
Please take a look if this works for you.
Agreed. Consensus. We want to support this. The plan is start building both images, keep BusyBox as the default, announce the change, gauge user feedback over the next few months. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Good. Also, we keep rushing through everything, and I'm completely fine with this, but I know from experience that other people would like a bio break at some point, but also we're more or less done with it anyway. So what do people think? Should we have a break, or should we just walk through the rest and we're done? Ben wants 5.
Yeah. I mean, if we only have one more point on the agenda, should we just do that point and then call it a day?
No,
We have
We-
way more
we-
points. It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
We've more agenda than we can do.
Yeah, I am just careful to not overextend ourselves with that. After this break, we will have more points on the agenda.
Okay, then let's have a break and then more points.
5 minutes of break, and everyone, please try and be here at 17:25 or 16:25 sharp. Of course, we will just continue at that point.
Yeah, see you in 5.
Yeah. Everyone who's still here, you can just start singing and dancing with me. Mm-hmm. That's Bartek. So for the people who are here, I'm just trying to like a few of the things which are equally ranked need prior work or don't have people here who actually suggested those topics. Gut feeling between analytics use case, discussing how to do if we should switch to Google Forms for vulnerability handling. Package management for Debian RPM and such. Dynamic scrape intervals, and that's it. I would tend towards analytics use case and dynamic scrape intervals. But if anyone else has any opinions, now is the time. Okay. Now here I'm thinking I don't have to do this alone. Oh, I counted it wrong. The next topic will be dynamic scrape intervals. I counted it wrongly.
Other random topic. Has everybody logged in and signed up for the discourse forum?
I did. Stuart is here and he's nodding, so he also did.
There's a reasonable number of questions being asked on it.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you want moderator?
That's up to you.
That was the main reason why I was asking if you're, or I was interested if you're there. I think that makes sense. So formally, we should probably take this on team just to have this. But I think everyone who's involved in community work should be having this. I don't know if Metal Max is also here, but I think he's also someone who should be having this. And ideally, we build up more and more people who are just active. Okay, 15 more seconds, everyone. If you're hearing this and not at your PC. Okay, so we are supposed to start, but the topic which is still as the next topic is by Björn, and the topic which had 5, there's Frederick. I counted wrongly. Frederick, your dynamic scrape intervals and scrape priority is actually ranked highest. It's ranked higher than Björn's correctly detecting counter resets in sum. I don't have an opinion on which we handle first. I just wanted to point out that I made a mistake, and the dynamic scrape intervals would be ranked higher, but I'm completely fine. Frederick, Björn, you decide.
I don't really care.
Björn, do you care?
No.
Okay,
Just
one of
everything is important.
Okay, who else cares? Okay, then let's just leave the order and just do the counter resets. Björn, hit it.
Yeah, so this is another of those misunderstandings where by just not being obnoxious, things get forgotten. So like for me, it was always a ward in Prometheus that we do not correctly detect counter resets in sum. Or in other words, whenever a histogram or summary gets a negative observation, which is completely legal as so far, the counter reset breaks. Counter reset detection breaks because _sum is not actually a counter, it's the sum of the observations. And whenever they go down, it looks like a counter reset. And the simple solution that I suggested long ago and had in mind was to just look for the associated _count, because that has the counter resets reliably, and whenever a counter resets and _count happens, then we also reset the sum. That would be, I think, an easy solution. It's a bit it feels a bit hacky because from the internal Prometheus perspective, _sum and _count are just independent time series. From the data model of the exposition, they are not, right? And this also links to what I always thought about our internal data model, that it is just for the MVP essentially. And at some point, not too far in the future, cough, cough, we would have a Prometheus that has a notion of complex metric types, and sum and count are just fields in a metric, right? With the new histograms, that will probably happen anyway. But that's also where, like, now I see that essentially Open Metrics has essentially banned negative observations, although it's not quite as explicit in the spec, and kind of mandated that the sum is also a counter. So now if we introduce this now, we could say we are not Open Metrics compliant anymore. So now I see kind of a vicious cycle of stabilizing things that I always consider to not be the final state we want to be in. And this is why I put it up here, so we can essentially find out what we actually want.
So just one thing first, and Ben is also here. From the Open Metrics perspective, the intention was, is, and will remain to stay as close to Prometheus as possible, for obvious reasons. So if Prometheus team decides to do a change which needs to be supported in Open Metrics will support it. Easy.
So there are two things. Something is that I don't think we should tie to the count, but to the created in Open Metrics, and that would tell us more like when the counter is now different. And the second thing is that I want to point out that Prometheus is not the reference implementation of the Open Metrics client. That's a Python implementation, but in the server we have some freedom compared to the plain Open Metrics stuff. So. But I think that we should more focus on the created time series than on the count time series, if we want to do that.
I mean, this is an interesting point. I was just never sure if created is really strictly creation of the counter, or if it is the last counter reset. Like, would you, if you just reset the counter because you can, which would be detected with the current heuristics, would the created timestamp also be updated from the, like,
that only exists in open metrics, right? It's not an old Prometheus thing, and I'm not sure if that's clear from the spec.
I don't think that does open metrics allow you to reset a counter yourself?
I mean, there's the old thing when we had 32-bit integers and integer overflows all the time, that a counter reset was also just an overflow of the counter variable, right? That doesn't really apply to modern Prometheus, modern monitoring as in Prometheus.
And exporters get counters from other places that may just reset because that switch rebooted.
Yeah, so in general, I think it's meant to be that whenever a counter goes backwards, for whatever reason, perhaps it's backed by a 32-bit integer on the source device and it just had an overflow, it will be detected as a counter reset. And I'm not sure if the created at, is it created at? Whatever. I mean, that timestamp is meant to be the timestamp of the last counter reset or the timestamp when the counter was initially created.
So
it's for created, and there are valid use cases for resetting. In particular, if you go to SNMP and such, they're even on what is super slow these days, a 10 gig interface runs up really, really quickly. So it is absolutely valid to simply reset that to 0 and not lose the precision if you care about the precision. You can also let it run longer, and then you will most likely not run out of those 64 bits. But if you care about the precision, just resetting that counter early is completely fine.
So an interesting wrinkle in this that I rediscovered today. I have an exporter that uses histograms to not represent observations in time, but observations in space. What it does is, this is a postfix exporter, and it does a give me all the messages in the queue, and it spits out a histogram of the distribution of sizes and ages of these messages at this point in time. But the count of this goes up and down as the number of messages goes up and down. And the sum goes up and down.
Sorry, is that a gauge histogram in the sense of open metrics? That's my suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Ben and Richie, you might know better, but my understanding of the gauge histogram is that's exactly that, right? Where the histogram is not like really a time series; it's just a data point in a histogram, right? I'm pretty sure that's the gauge histogram.
Yeah, you would not run an increase or a read function there, right?
No, you just go you just go straight up histogram quantile. Bam.
Yeah, so I think that's fine, and OpenMetrics covers that. I mean, Prometheus, native Prometheus doesn't have this, but OpenMetrics thought about this. So yeah, kind of different topic.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so what do we do about the underscore sum? It's also like, the question is it even a change? My understanding, but I'm often too silent about those things, was this is just a bug, and others assume this is a feature. So then the question is it even a change?
It is a change because you can still have a counter and some value which are not related. Which are buggy, and you might not notice that now. But
yeah,
it also depends how you want to detect that. If you want to insert an extra value in the TSDB, or if you want to do that only at the query level, that's also different stuff, different approaches.
No extra value. It's just like if you go through, if you do counter reset detection, and the variable happens to end on underscore sum, and there is precisely the same variable with the same metric with the same label set, and the only difference is underscore count, then you would detect the counter resets there. And once Prometheus has a notion of complex metric types, you don't need this like resolution by name anymore. And this, you could totally see this as a breaking change because now the counter reset works differently. But my argument is that, I mean, the probability that somebody creates this on purpose is very, very low.
Wait, so what happens today when I take a rate over this sum metric?
It's fine as long as you don't have negative observations. If you have that, you get erratic counter reset detection. So right now, if it's like the usual case that happens now, if you have negative observation, your rate over the sum is just broken. This is my argument why this is not a breaking change. This is a fixing change, right? where you just fix things that don't work nowadays. The only thing where this would be a surprise if you happen to have a underscore sum and an underscore count metrics that are not part of a histogram or summary, that are just randomly created, and originally they were actually whatever, a counter or gauge or something, and you now accidentally put them together.
But yesterday you shared a PromQL query, which can kind of disable the interpolation by running a subquery. That would not work anymore then. That kind of use cases would then be different if you use what's inside is a subquery or is an actual metric name.
Yeah, then it's a different metric, and you cannot do this kind of counter reset detection anymore. Yeah.
So we don't have functions that take two vectors now, but would that be the solution, that you can explicitly set a reference vector as a user that will be used for the counter reset?
Yeah, that was also one of my suggestions back then. That could be done to tell like a specific on an optional argument in a rate and increase where you say counter resets, please detect in this other metric, which is also like kind of cumbersome. I mean, the proper solution is to have metrics that are actually complex, and if you then do any operation on them, they spit out the same type of complex metrics again, right? But that's a more fundamental change in PromQL. And the argument so far is, I mean, I saw it as, yeah, we kind of wing it with the current model, and so we can as well wing this counter reset case.
So what we see now is we are seeing pull requests from Cortex because users have very slow query because of the high cardinality. And I don't see how we can fix that problem without introducing more latency in PromQL. And we see that currently, like, the performance of PromQL is causing issues at scale, at the Cortex scale. And I would not want to introduce new feature that would go in the way of getting more performances, because it seems that's what some of the users need.
Yeah, don't know. Like, I mean, if it's the problem here is that this is happening extremely rarely, right? So do you want additional performance? Although in 99% of the cases you don't have this, 99+%. I don't know, but if in your expression you have the underscore count anyway included, then it's probably not an additional performance overhead. Or it could be optimized not to.
So I think I got lost along the way at some point. I don't really understand what we actually why we need to do anything. At the moment, if I'm making expressions over my sums and counts and using them to calculate averages, I mean, I can use rate or I can use derivative depending on the shape of my data. And I just need to know, and that's generally the approach we have with counters, right? I need to know if it's a counter or not.
Yeah. The problem is that underscore sum ceases to be a counter the moment you have negative observations. And this is right. Like totally, I mean, you have no way of knowing that unless you just trust your monitor targets that they never do this.
But I would phrase it the other way around. I need to know that underscore sum is I need to know that it's a counter in the first place. from the name, that's not obvious.
Right, yeah, but this is what you do all the time, right? If you do any calculations with the underscore sum and underscore count of histograms and summaries, you assume it behaves like a counter. And that's true in 99+% of the cases, because people just rarely do negative observations.
Honestly, I would leave it at that. I would just leave it as it is and let people, like, if people do invalid, like, do rate over things that are not counters, yes, bad things happen. And I think in PromQL2, we should think about how do we fix that? How do we know what we are dealing with here? Right? Do we know if the, like, understanding the types of metric of time series? But I think
right.
in PromQL as it is, we already put the burden of this on the user anyway.
I mean, we allow negative observations in the instrumentation libraries, right? So
right, and we allow you to use derivative on this metric.
A derivative is not like the equivalent of rate, like the calculation is totally different, right?
Also, you can actually have a real counter reset in this, right? So that's totally normal, and then deriv would also not help you. Also, it's mathematically something else. It's just like we detect the counter resets at the wrong point, and we kind of if we don't consider this a bug, it's fine. Like, I just want to make this explicit. I consider it a bug. I always wanted to fix that, and of course, then other people had other opinions, and I think we need to clean up this kind of dissonance.
I would consider it a
Sorry?
I would consider it a bug in those queries if they're doing rate over something that can go down. That can happen in many places in PromQL as it is. I would like to consider ways of, like, not exposing users to this potential bug. But I don't think a special case solution for underscore sum and underscore count is the right way to go. I would leave my position is that this is fundamentally a problem in PromQL 1, and we should look at an elegant solution in PromQL 2.
And also, like in the exposers, they can, most of the time, they can use like absolute degrees, or they can shift the data up by 300 or something like that to not have those negative values.
I mean, the solution then would be to not accept negative observations in the instrumentation libraries.
Yes.
Because then you would force people to do this.
But I mean, I would like to act like, I mean, I like histograms that are over different things, right? So I would rather not force users into having some, like, that some must behave like a counter. And I would rather rely on, well, you know your data. For the common case, the common form of query works. When it starts erratically misbehaving, you look into why and you figure out, oh, it's actually going down. Sure, I can't do rate here.
Yeah, I think that's a bit. Also, it's nowhere documented, right? You have no.
That's something we can change, right? That's something we can be more clear about, or that we can put on the blog things to consider when you're dealing with histograms. Okay. Most histograms are counter-like because they always go up, and then you can do, and in that case, you want to do it this way. In that case, you want to use rate. But if you have something like my postfix histograms, you for sure don't want to do that.
Yeah, but that postfix histograms doesn't have sum and count, right?
Oh, no, it does. It has a sum over all the sizes, and it has a count of how many emails there are.
Okay, yeah. No, yeah, you're right. It's just a gauge histogram in open metrics lingo.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't.
And I think the longer term solution for having users not have to worry about it is, like, one, declaring whether this histogram is counter-like or not. So like separating out gauge histograms, which OpenMetrics already does, and then being aware of what the type was of what we scraped. And then having rate just do the right thing based on the type of the thing it gets.
Yeah, and this is the view I have of Prometheus, is that we essentially emulate this complex model by using magic suffixes on metric names, right? And what I think is what we always should have done is to embrace that and say, I mean, we even, I think, I don't know if it's completely forbidden that we just disallow using _sum and _count like arbitrarily on other metric types. Probably just checks for collisions, but yeah, kind of make this the way we mark a histogram in a summary. It's also
what matrix QL from Victoria Matrix is that they have all those fancy functions to calculate the ratio, so that you don't need to do the divide, and we could have something like that for the rate that would just take the two vectors and do the magic there, and we wouldn't break any user.
That's the third suggestion that I made back then. These are the three suggestions, right? To have a specific function to take for like where you want to combine sum and count in, if you want to do this, what is it called? Average, if you want to get your average latency and you divide rate sum divided by rate count, you just have a function for that, right? That was my one suggestion. The other is you have an additional parameter to tell rate where it should detect the counter resets. And the third suggestion was to just do this implicitly, right? Because I think it will just work, right? It's just, I mean, what you said, Julian, it's a performance overhead, of course. So yes.
It is not really a big performance overhead because you would do the division at the same time. So you would use the data you get.
Yeah, but should you ever just do a rate isolated on the sum, then this would implicitly do more work because it would look for count and look for counter resets there.
I do that sometimes.
Yeah, so this is
how much data have I shipped over this line, or how much time have we spent?
That's a valid concern, that this suddenly makes a lot of queries that didn't need that before more costly. But these were the three suggestions I made back then, and the fourth would be just leave it as is, but then we should at least be explicit that this is the case. And yeah, it's essentially, I would just like us to pick one of the four so that we are explicit about that, whatever we do.
My preferred one is to do nothing and put it on the pile of considerations for PromQL2.
Yeah, and I also know that no one outside of team jumped inside that issue. So it seems very, very theoretical.
It's negative observations are really rare. I'm just afraid that some people, I mean, I have seen so many people who accidentally did a rate on something that is not a counter, and it took them very, very long to notice. The last one that happened was a guy named Tom Wilkie, who doesn't know anything about Prometheus, right?
But was that about a sum?
No, this was just the case where you created a dashboard and you accidentally did rate of something that is not a counter. And because it didn't look obviously wrong on the dashboard, it took like a long time until someone realized, wait a second, what are you doing here?
I mean, another more orthogonal solution or more orthogonal proposal would be make the whole reset detection more smart about this. This isn't actually a reset. Right? This keeps going up and down, or I have multiple samples where it keeps going down one after another. That can't be there can't be 3 resets in 3 samples.
Yeah, but I mean it's an interesting consideration. But I think this use case is probably where you might have, let's say you have a histogram of an actual latency which should never be negative, but then you have some weird floating point, blah, blah, something, and you actually accidentally sometimes observe a tiny bit negative.
observation, and then you suddenly have a huge counter reset. Rarely, right? So you wouldn't even notice. This is my suspicion why this has never been brought up, either because use cases were so esoteric that people didn't even dare to complain about it, or it was something that just got under the radar, but in some specific, or it might have created some confusion, but nobody ever suspected that this is the reason. So this is, especially because it's so rare, I'm a bit worried that I mean, yeah. Again, I'm saying the same thing. If we decide to not do anything, we should make it very explicit.
This is what we have done in Open Metrics then, saying that you should not have the sum.
Almost, because Open Metrics says, I think it says nothing about summaries. It's completely silent about the problem. And in histograms, it says if there are negative buckets defined, then the sum goes away. It's just not exposed, right? But you could still have only defined positive buckets and do negative observations, and the sum behaves in this way. And this case, I think, isn't really covered. Like, it should probably name, if you ever have a single negative observation, kick out the sum or something like that. But I'm not even sure if that would be consistent. You should probably, yeah, I don't know. It's a messy thing.
That's not directly related to the discussion we're currently having, but we can easily just put more stuff onto the considerations, and we intend to put a few more things into the consideration section anyway. So any and all input is more than welcome. With the Open Metrics head on, not the Prometheus one.
I just wanted to say the comment a moment ago about treating for resets, if you had several subsequent samples that go down, that could happen with a counter. If you have a reasonably long scraping interval and something was to keep crashing and restarting, for example, that could quite legitimately happen. So just be cautious of that.
That is true, but then we still can't actually calculate any reasonable rate.
Yeah, but this is
so we could say, like, we could just say, like, we don't return any data at that point because we don't actually know. Right?
And then someone is sitting there and doesn't know why they have this gap there, because something super magic is implicitly happening super deeply somewhere in their stack. I don't think overly magic, like principle of least surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is completely orthogonal to have some whatever. It could be just a warning. This counter is resetting quite often. Are you sure it's really a counter, right? But I think this is different from what I'm talking about, because in that case of a rare negative observation, you would also see very rare pseudo counter resets, right? So that doesn't even help you here. It's more like, yeah. This is, I'm specifically afraid of this because it could break in very, like, not very visible ways. And yeah, I guess it's saying the same thing. At least let's be explicit about it if we don't want to change anything. I just thought we should just do this implicit thing because it will, in the overwhelming majority, will do the right thing. Only concern is that it might be, in specific cases, a performance overhead that in very few cases might actually like be so annoying that it makes a query that was just under the timeout before it's now running in a timeout.
So
I wouldn't be too concerned about that one, but it's irrelevant.
I think I would not want to do anything about it because we have a well-defined behavior now. And like, if a user really has a use case that really cannot be solved by any magic that we have in place, we can revisit. But as far as it stands, I think it's well documented, the behavior of the rate function and that kind of thing. So I don't think we want to change anything.
The rate function is not, the documentation is fine. The problem is that the underscore sum is documented as a counter, essentially.
So that's an issue. Yeah, that's an issue at the Open Metrics side.
It's also, yeah, it's an issue for users. They use the instrumentation library, they learn about observations, and there is no warning sign that you should probably not put negative observations here.
Well, I mean, my point is, or my position is that you should totally put negative observations there. Then you just can't do rate things in your queries.
Yeah.
That's a connection that is for sure hard to make at the moment, because you need to combine multiple concepts across different pages in the documentation to work out that you shouldn't do this. But we can clarify these things. We can put in the rate that, like, if this goes down, for example, if you have negative observations in your histogram, don't use this. There we can put in the histogram documentation, if you have negative observations, calculate your ratios like so. Or don't calculate ratios. Like
Yeah, you can't calculate rates. It's gone.
Exactly.
You can,
but I
you
think
can
that's
create.
something that, so I would also like to solve this with documentation and clarification, and not change the behavior of the, like, not, I wouldn't like to make PromQL more magic.
Yeah, and then do this once we have a PromQL that has a notion of complex types.
Yes.
Then it can be done.
Yes. Then it can be
Okay.
done not magically, but like in a well-defined way.
So is that what we want to do? Everyone is just confused, right?
Maybe we need to spell it out into an actual consensus, because I think we have 3 points. Put it on the list for PromQL 2. Document it better. Oh, we have 2 things. Those are the 2.
And not change the behavior.
That's implicit.
PromQL 1.
Okay, yeah, okay, but we can also make it explicit. Which closes the door on Björn to some extent, which I
mean, not like all behaviors of PromQL, just like this one particular one. I would, or we just leave it open.
That's my intention here, but we can also close it. I don't feel strongly. Whatever way the consensus goes.
I think we should decide this now. If we want, I mean, if we change it, we wouldn't change it today, right? We would just know this is an open bug and we work on it. But I think we should decide today, and I'm fine with whatever way we go. We should just make it explicit. This is kind of a known feature. If you have negative observations, you cannot rate your sum. That just should be super clear. And at the moment, that's not explicitly clear. And if we don't want to change the behavior, then we should just make this clear and say any change will be future version of PromQL with whatever science fiction new metric types that we will have in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to say. Exactly that.
That's not what I would prefer. I would go for the magic thing, but I'm also, yeah, if that's not the consensus, we can also just stay where we are, but make it explicit.
Yeah, I would prefer we stay where we are, but we can also point out that we have functions to detect reset on any metric, that kind of thing. So you could make advanced PromQL queries if you really need to detect that kind of things.
Sorry, what was that?
Well, we already have a reset function, so you could actually like do AND and see if there is a reset in another metric and then use rate or another function. So the question is, do we need another function or that kind of thing? But I would not do any magic at this point. I would just like better document it and maybe like help the user which would actually face that in reality, because it's still very theoretical.
I mean, the actual workaround is that if you really want to have negative observations, you just have 2 histograms and summaries, one for positive and one for negative observations, where for the negative one, you invert it into positive, and then you have a more complex query that puts it all together in the end. Like, this is the workaround that we should probably advertise if one ever has this case of negative observations. But of course, we should have never allowed negative observations in the first place in any instrumentation library if this is the way to go. But too late.
Can we have that as an optional behavior on the plain Golang?
What?
The creation of the second time series if you have a negative observation.
You mean automatically create the second time series for the negatives?
And then
Yes.
have another magic suffix that,
Yes.
that marks it as the negative histogram. And then
So we move the magic to your repository.
now, I mean, the magic wouldn't work because you still need horribly complicated queries. I think this is a fair workaround, but it should be done explicitly. I don't think there's any value.
Yeah,
Okay, but I think we get it. Like most people are like confused and bored, and the people who like no one likes to support my case of making it more magic, so we just go for the leave the status quo, but make it very explicit.
Okay. We are also at time, so let me just try and go for the consensus. Consensus. We will not change the behavior in promql1.x. We will consider this for promql2.x. We will document this better.
Yeah.
All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Very good. We keep churning through our backlog at pace. That is nice. I'll put the other two back in the bucket for next time.
Yeah. I mean, we just delete the done topics from the document, right?
Yeah, I'll juggle this right after. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending, especially the non-Prometheus team members. Feel empowered to talk more, a lot more. And see you next month, hopefully.
Yeah, and next month, yeah, you might have switched to DST, that kind of thing, so be careful about the time of the meeting.
Yes, the meeting is, the complete calendar is in UTC and the meeting is also in UTC.
So the meeting never changes, but you might change.
Yes.
Okay. But it's also true once travel starts again. So the meeting is eternal.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Stop recording.